Let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to KT Connects. It's a pleasure to be back with you. It's our KT Connects is our monthly knowledge translation skills and best practices webinar series, co-hosted by Arthritis Research Canada and Michael Smith Health Research BC. My name is Kevin Sauvé. I manage Health Research BC's Science Initiative, and I'll be the host for the webinar today. A few things to note before we get started. Please use the Q&A dialog box for the speaker at any point during the webinar. We'll ask those questions at the end in the last 15 minutes. The chat box is also enabled and is intended for you to share your thoughts with your fellow participants and the organizers. To be safe, though, please don't share any personal information in the chat box. The webinar is being recorded and it will be made available to you on Health Research BC's website. And if you use social media, please post content about today's workshop and anything about this series using the hashtag KTConnects. But before I begin, I want to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples who are the stewards of this territory from which we're located today. We recognize Health Research BC and Arthritis Research Canada are situated on the traditional, ancestral, and stolen territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, known colonially today as Vancouver, Canada. From coast to coast to coast, we want to acknowledge all the Inuit, Métis, First Nations, and Indigenous peoples who've called Turtle Island home for many generations. Our aim with KT Connects is to serve as a catalyst for collaborative and collective learning, fostering meaningful discussions, engagement, and partnerships along the way. So as we gather here today to have these conversations, let us also consider how we can actively contribute to a vital process of decolonization in our respective fields and daily lives, especially on the heels of Truth and Reconciliation Day, national recognition for Truth and Reconciliation on Monday, September 30th. So please feel free to provide your own personal acknowledgements and commitments to reconciliation in the chat box. So a reminder that this year, KT Connects is focusing on open science, what also could be known as open scholarship, which is a growing and global movement aimed at advancing solutions to increasingly complex and interrelated challenges. It does this by making changes to research practices and processes so that scholarly outputs are freely available for everyone with minimal restrictions. Knowledge translation is one important component of national and international open science frameworks, such as Canada's roadmap to open science, and as you see here, UNESCO's recommendation on open science, as I said, which is illustrated by this figure on the screen. And as you can see from this framework, open science means much more than open access to journal publications. It aspires to make scientific and research processes more accessible, transparent, reproducible, and more collaborative. It's worth noting that knowledge mobilization is expressly included as a key component of Canada's roadmap to open science. Of course, such significant changes to well-established and even ancient practices should anticipate significant challenges. How can we ensure researcher and research subject privacy and data security? How can we continue to encourage innovation by protecting intellectual rights? What costs should be incurred by researchers, funders, and publishers when it comes to making knowledge more freely available? And how can we ensure consistent and fair assessments and evaluations that encourage academic career progression? These and many other questions are an important part of the open science dialogue. And with this in mind, our intention with KT Connects series focused on open science and scholarship is to foster that dialogue within the research community here in British Columbia and beyond, and to highlight the array of perspectives from scientists and scholars at the forefront of this movement and elsewhere, here and across Canada. Today is our 5th talk in the series. If you have not seen the past 4 webinars, I highly encourage you to visit Health Research BC's website and YouTube channel to find and watch the other recordings. And now I have the pleasure of introducing today's esteemed speaker, Dr. Kelly Coby. Dr. Coby is a scientist at the University of Ottawa Institute, where she leads a meta-research and open science program, and is an associate professor in the School of Epidemiology and Public Health at the University of Ottawa. She is active in the national and international global science policy community, presently serving as the co-chair of the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, otherwise known as DORA, and is a current member of the Council of Canadian Academies expert panel on dual-use research of concern. She actively consults to provide her expertise to federal agencies and academic institutions. Dr. Coby has interests in topics including the implementation of open science, the reporting quality of research, data management and sharing best practices, research reproducibility, and patient engagement in research. Which is why Dr. Coby is the perfect person to provide us with an overview of national and international science policy related to open science and the academic incentives and reward systems used to encourage knowledge production and its use. And so I won't keep you waiting any longer. Dr. Coby, over to you.
Thank you so much, Kevin, and thank you all for your time today and availability to attend and make time in your busy schedule for the session. Before I pop up my slides, Kevin, is there a way to enable the chat? I think it's not open and some folks are looking to do their land acknowledgements.
Oh, my apologies. Let me see here. So we have support online, and we'll get that sorted right away.
Excellent. And I need you to take down your slides so I can put mine up. So while we're getting started, I can share that I'm joining you today from Ottawa, unceded Algonquin-Anishinaabe territory, and so pay respects to those people, and especially looking forward to sort of Monday's a day of truth and reconciliation, and the ability to engage with some activities here locally in Ottawa with that community. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. You all see my screen there okay, Kevin?
Yes, we can see your
Perfect.
screen.
All right, so I'm going to be talking about shifting research assessment today, and really how we can use research assessment to implement open science and other practices that we often say are part of our mission, but I think don't really tend to incentivize. So just a couple of declarations before I get started. So as we mentioned, I'm the co-chair of DORA, which I will mention quite a lot towards the end of the talk. And I'm going to talk about a study that I received directed funding from SSHRC to do on behalf of the tri-agencies that dealt with evaluating institutional research data management strategies. So I don't think it's sort of a conflict per se, but I just want to make folks aware. All right, so in terms of today, I've really structured the session around 3 learning objectives. So the first is that I'm going to begin by describing what open science is and the factors that I think impact its implementation. So the goal here is really to create a bit of a common understanding of open science in the Canadian landscape. Then I'm going to move on and identify relevant Canadian science policies and frameworks related to both open science and research assessment reform. And I'll end by describing limitations of the current system of incentives and rewards in research, and what I think can be done with our current system to further foster the implementation of open science. Okay, so kicking off in terms of a sort of definition of open science, there's actually no consensus on what open science is. I like to think of it as both a movement and practice to conduct science in a more transparent way. And it's an umbrella term for a set of different behaviors or actions. Some of the examples that are commonly looped into this open science umbrella are open access publishing, things like open data, making code available, study materials available, also the publication of study preprints. Some even incorporate citizen science or patient engagement within the umbrella of open science, as they do practices like study registration, open peer review, and the production of open educational resources. So this is not an exhaustive list, but this is, I think, when most people think about open science, these are the common practices that are typically discussed. So I want to pause for a minute and just sort of reflect on that definition. So I've just told you that open science is a movement and practice to conduct research more transparently. So by necessity of that statement, it means that open science is not the current norm or status quo within research. So open science is not science, and I think that's really problematic because I think transparency, I think the average member of the public would think would be a cornerstone of research conduct, design, and reporting. And I think we're falling short in really maintaining that sort of trust in achieving that level of transparency. So I think that one day I certainly hope that when we say science, open science is sort of integral to that core. But right now we live in a society where science tends to be fairly closed, and especially when it comes to data, we're quite protectionistic. So I want to give 3 examples of why, now that we have sort of a common understanding of what open science is, why I think it's important that we really, in this country and elsewhere, foster open science. And the first example pertains to how open science supports equity. And in this respect, I want to tell you a story about a patient at the Ottawa Hospital called Jenna Kindle. And so Jenna has shared her story. I can share my slides afterwards. You can read it. It's very powerful. But I'll do my best to sort of briefly summarize it. Essentially, Jenna, her life changed as a consequence of accessing an open access article. So when Jenna was a child, she was diagnosed with limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. This was obviously quite devastating and challenging for her and her family, because there's not like a really quality treatment or cure for this. It's really degenerative over time. So after her diagnosis, she lost muscular strength over time. She uses a wheelchair now. And what really frustrated her and her family is that they never knew the genetic subtype of her limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. So this was always sort of a big question mark for her. Jenna lives a very full and complete life. Part of that life is her role as an advocate in her patient community. And she's very involved in sort of her disease society, and including as part of a member of a Facebook group of patients really across the globe that have her condition. And one day, while looking at that Facebook group, she saw an article that her colleague and peer sort of in the US had shared with her in this group. And they'd spoken before, and he basically shared this article with her group, and it said limb-girdle muscular dystrophy mimics autoimmune disorder. And she clicked on the link and she read it, and she felt that a lot of her experience with her condition really resonated with this article. And so, armed with this open access publication, she went here to the Ottawa Hospital and to her clinician, Dr. Jody Wortman, and said, like, listen, I've read this article. I really feel like this like resonates with sort of my clinical picture. Do you think I could have an autoimmune disorder, since we've never found my genetic subtype? And Dr. Wortman took the article, discussed it with Jenna, and said that unfortunately, no. She thought that Jenna had limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. It didn't really jive with sort of her assessment of the clinical picture. But because it was just a blood test, she would run that blood test for Jenna to just rule it out. Lo and behold, very shortly after, Jenna got a call from Dr. Wortman and her office informing her that the test had come back positive. She indeed did not have limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. She had this particular autoimmune disorder. This meant that there were treatments available to her that were otherwise not available, and really completely changed the course of her clinical care. So I think this is a very powerful and local example of how equity and access to information really can have profound effects. So, Jenna is not some sort of like academic specialist. She's a patient who is advocating for herself and her community. And had she have clicked on that link from her colleague in this sort of Facebook group, and it said like $32.99, put your visa in here, we can rest well assured that Jenna probably would not have the new diagnosis that she does have. Okay, the second example I wanted to give of why we need to value and foster open science pertains to research integrity. So this really beautiful building is in the Netherlands. It's in Groningen, in the north of the country. It's the city I did my PhD in. And while I was there was a very prominent Dutch social psychologist in the south of the country called Diederik Stapel, who it was determined through a number of investigations and some whistleblowing that Diederik had actually fabricated decades worth of his career. So he quite literally made up entire research projects, didn't get them REB approved. There was no data collection that occurred. He literally like inserted into Excel or created summary tables of the data. And so I'm not going to tell you that I think, open science will catch every sort of bad actor, but I do think that having checks and balances in our academic system where, we write a protocol, we share our REB approval of that protocol, we make our data and our materials available, the process of science, which is typically closed. I think if it becomes more open, these types of practices are harder to perform, and there's a way of auditing people's behavior in a more transparent environment. And so the third component or example I'll give of why I think we need to foster open science is that open science really does support innovation. And I think when people think about open science and innovation, they typically think about open data and how open data can be used to leverage new discoveries and answer different questions than the original study intended. Especially when in that regard, when we aggregate across multiple data sets, it really allows us the power to do sort of big data analytics. The example I'll give here pertains to COVID-19. So the Pfizer vaccine, which many of us have actually received, it began, the development for that vaccine began literally the same day that the genome sequence for COVID was publicly released. So the fact that the public release occurred allowed sort of widespread access to the genome and immediate action of a large number of pharmaceutical companies and research institutions. So ultimately leading them to more quickly develop the vaccine than they otherwise would if data hadn't been shared. Okay, so at this point in the session, I've talked about sort of what open science is, this movement and practice to conduct research more transparently. I've said that a lot of research in Canada isn't actually occurring under the umbrella of open science practices. And I've talked about 3 different examples of why I think open science should be fostered and is really valuable. So at this point, then I think it begs the question, is Canada leveraging the power of open science? So the 3 examples I gave, I think, are strong ones, but there are many other examples of the impact of open science. So let's explore that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through 3 examples of open science policies in the Canadian landscape, namely as they pertain to open access publishing, clinical trial registration, and research data management. And what I'm going to show you, I think, through my talk today is that there are significant efforts underway to make open science mainstream in this country, but that we're suffering from a bit of an implementation gap. And I'm going to talk about sort of what that gap is and how I think we can fill it. So I'm going to start off, as I mentioned, with open access. So I talked about open access in the context of Jenna Kendall's story. And, you know, in that context, I spoke about how open access is the availability of the article in a freely accessible way. And that's true, but there's a second component of open access publishing that a lot of people don't think about. And it's not that just that the work is freely available. It's also that open access publications are licensed, typically using Creative Commons license, in such a way that makes them free to build upon as well. So this is really important for innovation. And so when we look at the Canadian landscape in terms of our mandates for open access publishing, the Tri-Agency presently requires all funded research to be openly accessible within 12 months. And there's actually, it's a very active area of discussion because there's active discussion as to whether or not Canada should join Plan S. And I think it looks like we're moving in that direction. So Plan S is basically a network of funders and organizations that have made a commitment to immediate open access for all funded research. So the idea would be right now we have an embargo period of 12 months where you can publish and then put your work in a repository, or maybe the publisher makes it open. If we join Plan S and require immediate open access, that sort of window of embargo period would be lifted. So we can look at how we're doing. I mean, we've had literally beyond decades long policies around open access within the various agencies, and then they created a harmonized version of an open access policy. Well, we can see that between 2015 and 2019, only 44% of the articles published in Canada, like funded by the tri-agencies, actually were publicly available. So we're clearly falling short on this sort of initiative and desire to make things available. And what's more is that I think in Canada, like in many nations, there's significant issues right now around how we facilitate making publicly available records of our publications. So, you know, the uptake of say preprints, which are free to create, like non-peer-reviewed versions of manuscripts shared prior to publication, has been very modest, I would say. But we continue nonetheless to publish in peer-reviewed academic journals, often published by large for-profit entities like Elsevier or Frontiers and so on. And so this article is by Stephanie Haustein and colleagues, preprint, and they looked at over a 4-year period between 2019 and 2023, how much money globally we were sort of putting into these for-profit publishers to publish article processing charges to make pieces openly available. And you can see that it's like $8.349 billion. So it's quite alarming. So I think that in Canada, we have a policy that says we need things to be publicly available within 12 months. We're moving towards having one that possibly will require immediate open access, but the venue or avenue for achieving this is typically for-profit entities like this. So I don't think this is a responsible way of sort of spending tax dollars. I think there are alternative publication models that aren't and need to be explored. Okay, so the second example that I'm going to give in terms of the context for open science in Canada, and it pertains to trial registration and results reporting. So registration is the process of making a standardized protocol available in a designated registry. So essentially what this means is when you write your protocol, you either make it publicly available in some way, or the protocol itself is captured through a standard intake form in a registry. So you can register any type of study design in any area. So within medicine, outside of medicine, any study type, whether it's observational research, systematic review, or clinical trial. But there is actually a national and several international mandates to do so for clinical trials. And really the reason why we want people to register studies, in particular clinical trials, it serves two broad functions. The first is that with trials, registering them provides a record of ongoing trials. And this is really relevant for patients themselves who may want to be recruited into trials. And it also helps to reduce duplication. So if I, as an investigator, want to conduct a trial, I can see like, okay, there's no evidence of this effectiveness of this intervention in the literature, but then I can see, is anyone already doing this? So some amount of duplication in research is helpful, but not like enormous amounts. So it can reduce duplication by having a record of what's going on. Another thing that is critical about registration is that it provides a standardized summary of the results. So the idea is before your study, you register it before recruitment. And after your study, you put the results of your study back in the registry. And this allows us to mitigate publication bias and selective outcome reporting, because it provides this sort of publicly accessible record that we can use to audit. So if someone does this trial and they say, I'm interested in a primary outcome of A and a secondary outcome of B, we can track forward to the registry and the results. And if there's a paper, we can look to see, do they report on both A and B, or do they only report, say, on B and they leave out A, or is there no record of results altogether? So this is really important, especially in terms of when we think about knowledge synthesis projects like systematic reviews that go on to inform clinical practice guidelines. What we don't want is like chunks of evidence missing. And so with regards to trial registration, there are really clear mandates for registration of results and reporting of trials. So TCPS2 requires this. There's also the World Health Organization requires this. Declaration of Helsinki required this. And it's beyond trials, it's a best practice for other designs. So I would say most systematic reviewers, as a standard practice, register their trial, although there's not the same sort of policy mandate to do so. So then we can ask, just like we did with open access, we've got our policy in place. So this means we're recognizing the value of registration. So the question then is, how are we doing? And so what we did in our team, led by he's a resident now, but he was a med student at the time, Mohsen Aliyesh, is we looked at all clinical trials registered in Canada conducted between 2009 and 2019. So we used the registry clinicaltrials.gov, which is the typical registry Canadian trialists use. And that led us to 6,720 trials to consider. And so what we were interested in doing is looking at 4 questions. So the first was just what % of trials are registered before the study starts? So this, again, is the mandate from TCPS2 and the World Health Declaration. Then what % of trials report the results in the registry when done? And then based on experience, we also asked what % of trials go on to be published in a scholarly journal. Because in interacting with trialists, many of them say, oh, I don't put my results in the registry, but I was published. So it's like the record is there. I do put my results out. I find this problematic for a number of reasons. One, we know lots of articles aren't published open access, and selective outcome reporting can occur in a journal article. And also, this is not providing a standardized report of the results like the registry does. But nonetheless, we thought, okay, let's see, they say they're not using the registry, but they're reporting in a publication. So we looked at that. And then what we did is we looked at across all 3 of these questions, what % of trials did all 3 things. So it's not, I think, super demanding. We basically what % of trials registered prospectively, reported their results in the registry, and published in a scholarly journal. And I think the results were quite shocking. So we found that only about 56% of trials were registered prospectively, meaning almost half are not registered at all, or registered too late, I should say. What percent of trials report the results in the registry when done? Again, 39%, really disappointing. When we look at who's publishing, just 55% of these trials go on to be published. And then perhaps most disappointing at all, when you look across these variables, who did everything, 3% of trialists from that group of 6,720 trials did all three things. So I think this is quite disappointing on a number of levels. I think when I think about trials, they're typically one of the most expensive studies conducted. So I think it reflects a lot of waste in terms of investment into these studies if they're not getting registered and reported effectively. And really, I see ourselves as researchers, as custodians of patient data. And so the many tens of thousands of patients that participated in these trials, I think they would expect that their participation led to sort of reports and data that are used to innovate, discover, and be having an impact positively. And I don't think that this would suggest that we're doing that as best as we could do. In terms of a bit of context, there is some good news to report here. So in 2020, the World Health Organization released a new joint statement on public disclosure of results from trials, basically trying to address this issue that people have made policy statements but haven't actually ensured that their funded projects actually get registered and get reported in the registry. So they created a new renewed statement, which CHR signed onto, and made a commitment after January 1st, 2022, to start publicly reporting and monitoring this process. So our data took us like right up to this period. So I hope to be able to redo this study and come back with some positive increases in rates of registration and results reporting. I will say that how they're monitoring is in the form of a survey. The first year's sort of iteration of that survey had very poor response rates, but I do think that efforts in that office are underway to really enhance that monitoring to make sure that we get this done. So I'm very optimistic that our data will change in the coming years. Okay, so the third example that I wanted to go through pertains to data management. So many of you will be aware of the, it feels recent, but time flies. So that in 2021, the tri-agencies released a new policy on research data management. And really, there are three broad requirements of this policy. So the first was that starting in spring 2022, researchers were required to submit data management plans as part of grant proposals for selected calls. So some of these calls, for instance, actually the trials call last year had this requirement. So we're being faced with a formalization of data management planning at the grant submission phase. The second component of this data management policy was that by March 1st, 2023, research institutions were asked to develop and make public research data management strategies. So institutions may have had research data management processes, but I think this really pushed them to formalize strategies around research data management. And then finally, there is a goal of this policy to implement a data deposit requirement for funded research. So it's not an open data requirement, it's a data deposit requirement, and it's yet to be rolled out. I've heard rumblings that it's coming in 2025, but in what form is still unclear. So I want to sort of comment on the sort of data management planning landscape from my perspective based on these incoming mandates. So the first being this DMP requirement as part of some grants, and that I think will be increasing over time. So in Canada, we have a tool called the DMP Assistant, and I would say that it's a great tool. It's bilingual. It works sort of effectively, but I would say that it needs refinement. So right now, you can see on the screen a list of examples of templates that are in this DMP template assistant tool. So the idea is that you go into the tool, you select your template, and then you can populate a data management plan, which is, by the way, it's exactly as it sounds. It's a plan for how you'll manage data across the research life cycle. And so you'll populate that, and then you'll be able to have that sort of completed DMP. But when you look at the DMP templates, they're very broad and not specific. So for instance, like imagine in the health space, for instance, using the same template for conducting a clinical trial as doing a preclinical study in rats. Or imagine using the same template for a cohort study tracking a population over time as a preclinical systematic review. It just doesn't make sense that the vast differences in the way data is collected and the types of data would be managed in a single form. So one thing our team is actually doing is we're creating templates that are design specific in different areas of medicine. So we've done it so far for trials, systematic reviews, genomic studies, and preclinical animal studies. And we're looking to grow the templates. And I really think there needs to be a broader grassroots initiative from researchers who can get funded to create these resources that could then be populated within the DMP Assistant and used by the community. Last week, I looked at the DMP Assistant when I started to make these slides, and there's only 54 publicly available data management plans in the whole system that are posted. So if the idea is that this is going to be a national resource, we really need to think about how we can get this to researchers and make it usable for them, because obviously with just 54 in there, it seems that the community is not sort of seeing the value in the tool in its current form, or perhaps are just unaware of the tool altogether. Okay, so the second component of the RDM policy that's being rolled out is the mandate for institutional strategy. So I mentioned at the start that I got a little bit of money from SSHRC on behalf of the tri-agencies to actually do a mapping, not an audit, really just a mapping to describe what institutions put into their research data management strategies to really better understand their capacity to address new RDM challenges. So we looked at all publicly available strategies that were posted in response to this mandate as of February 2024. And so there was 211 at that time, and we did a bunch of data extraction and sort of synthesis from them. And so I'm just presenting one slide of key results, but what we found when reading these strategies is that there were a lot of gaps identified, particularly around research data management expertise among the research community, and particularly staff, in terms of staffs providing support for the researchers. There's really a gap recognized there. There's also reviewing, modifying, or creating new policies is of high priority among institutions. So really, they don't have the policies in place to align themselves with the RDM policy or to support their researchers in aligning themselves in their day-to-day research. And then lots and lots of concern about resources, whether financial or personnel resources or other resources that have identified that they're basically saying in the absence of resources, it's going to be difficult to implement the strategy. So many institutions felt like they kind of knew what they needed to do, but they weren't equipped with the right resources to get it done. Okay, so the third and final part of that national requirement for or RDM policy, I should say, is the data deposit. So the data deposit hasn't been mandated yet. It's due to be rolled out soon. Again, it's not an open data requirement, but it's some sort of data deposit requirement, so it can be by restriction. I just wanted to comment, so in my view, at this current point, while the strategy has not been rolled out, I'm really interested to see how it moves forward, because we know that when you look at the Canadian infrastructure, we have FRDR and Borealis as national repositories, and they have clear strengths, but in my view are not fit for purpose for sort of responding to a data deposit requirement, especially when we consider health research, because we know, for example, neither of these tools can deal with sensitive access, like restricted access data. I know that FRDR, they're trying to develop and make it fit for purpose for that type of data, but at this current time, that's not the case. Also, some concerns are that there's like very limited uptake of both of these tools, like broadly within the health research community, even for open data or data that could be shared openly. And so Borealis, as an example, I looked, there was just 18 records at the University of Ottawa in sort of the health medicine discipline in the entirety of the repository. So I think people may be unaware of Borealis, unsure how to use it, perhaps unsure how to de-identify data. So I think in terms of thinking of that tri-agency policy around research data management, I think it's great, and I think it's needed, and it's started some very important discussions in our country. But I think we're really there's a gap in terms of education and awareness of how to actually get these practices done, and that the consultation with researchers will be absolutely essential to do that. Okay, so your whirlwind tour of Canadian science policies pertaining to open science it has now ended. So this started with me asking the question of, is Canada leveraging the power of open science? And I think based on what I've just said, I'm cautiously optimistic looking at those three examples of different science policies, that there's certainly a recognition of the value of open science. There's certainly policies coming out to try to support open science. But I think that there's a gap in terms of the policy and its effective implementation. And this will take time, and I hope that we're able to address it in a smooth way. Some concerns that I have sort of looking at a high level system is that the tri-agencies presently have no public record of their research outputs, whether that's data or publications or patents. Like we see no public record of sort of what funding has created. There's also no national coordination for open science across institutions, funders, or societies, which I think is unfortunate. And I think to streamline our successes and really benefit from one another, we need that. There's also no national training programs in open science. So open science is something we typically learn on the job. It's not something that's formally taught. I think we do need to formally teach it, especially when it pertains to things like research data management, de-identification, and sharing. And then finally, there's very few opportunities for funding. So for people like me looking to do meta research and open science implementation work, a lot of my funding has come from charities or come from the European Union. However, today they're set to announce details of a meta science competition. So hopefully that announcement, I haven't seen it yet, maybe it's out already, will provide a pot of funding for people to do this work in our community. Okay, so I think based on that, you can see that I feel that the desire for open science is there. But one of the gaps that I see is that perhaps and why we're not implementing effectively from the researcher perspective is that our incentives and research assessment processes are not aligned with supporting open science at all. So what I mean by that is that incentives in academia don't facilitate open science. Our traditional metrics like number of publications or journal impact factor or the grant funds that a researcher has obtained speak very little to the quality of their open science practices. So in fact, if these are the criteria that we're selected on in terms of tenure, promotion, grant funding, and so on, I actually think that doing open science would put you at a disadvantage because it takes a lot of time to do open science. So I feel our current system of traditional metrics, it tends to value quantity over quality, and open science is really about quality. It's about reproducibility. It's about transparency. So if we want open science, these types of metrics aren't going to get us, I think, incentivizing those behaviors. So I'm going to talk in that respect about DORA, which Kevin mentioned I'm the co-chair of. So DORA stands for Declaration on Research Assessment. And the goal or mission of DORA is to advance practical and robust approaches to improve how research is assessed across all scholarly disciplines. So really looking at ways to improve research assessment at a global and cross-disciplinary scale. So no pressure. We've got a pretty big mandate though. DORA really exists. I like to say DORA is born out of frustration. People need to assess research and they want to use evidence to do that. But people are very frustrated. It started at a conference in San Francisco, where researchers felt that the ways they were being assessed, namely impact factor initially, is flawed or inappropriate. So it didn't speak to the quality of the work that they're doing. And so DORA really wants to foster better ways to assess research. So moving beyond these traditional metrics to a range of other metrics that actually assess and consider the different types of outputs and impacts researchers have. DORA is best known for its declarations. So DORA initiated as a declaration to raise awareness, but is now very much a global initiative that is above and beyond sort of the declaration itself, where we create tools, resources, and communities of practice around research assessment reform. So the declaration itself draws attention to potential problems of journal-based metrics in hiring, promotion, and funding decisions. I think a lot of people feel that like DORA, their main recommendation is to not use the impact factor, and definitely it is a core recommendation. But people are often not aware that the DORA declaration actually includes a set of 18 distinct recommendations, and for different stakeholders. So, for instance, funders, institutions, publishers, metrics producing organizations, and researchers themselves. So there's actually a wide range of suggestions for these different actors in the system. There's a lot of community support demonstrated for DORA. It's currently signed by more than 25,000 individuals and organizations, including 56 organizations in Canada. And that number is growing. It's been really great to see since taking over the leadership of DORA with Ginny Barber, just how many Canadian organizations are really interested in engaging and being part of this discussion. And so the idea here is that we need new forms of assessment to better recognize mission-driven goals. So in terms of open science, I highlight here two examples from the Declaration of institutional recommendations. So the first is to focus on the merits of specific individual works. So the idea here is that when you're assessing a researcher at their institution, you should not be looking to rely specifically on heavily competitive journals, so like where the journal article actually sits, but really looking at the specific work and, is it of high quality and on what measure? And I think this focus would really promote open science, but also a range of other things like reproducibility, EDI, Indigenous engagement, patient engagement, knowledge translation, knowledge mobilization. It's like the periphery of the things that we're meant to do that I think we all agree are critical to quality research. None of those are valued in the impact factor or in these quantitative metrics for publication output. So we need to actually start looking at individual works and saying, like, how does this work align with our mission-driven goals? And the idea here is a second recommendation is beyond publications. So look at publications in a different way. That's the first recommendation. The second recommendation is look at things beyond publications. So for instance, the Tri-Agency has this data deposit requirement coming in. We have to actually value people doing those data deposits and doing them in a high quality way if we want to see them being done. Same with Indigenous engagement, and particularly in context to data sovereignty considerations. If you want researchers to actually engage respectfully with Indigenous communities, they are going to need to take time to do that. And so that time needs to be valued and appreciated as part of their output of what they've done, say in a certain period of time to show their productivity. Right now, it's like the assumption is you'll just do all that work in the background, and at the end of the day, it's just the publication that matters. And I think that's deeply problematic. In terms of DORA in action in Canada, there's been a number of organizations that have, I think, really come out as leaders in this space. With respect to institutions, the University of Calgary, I think, is doing a fantastic job. I won't go into great detail, but just sharing that they do have a website. What they have done is they've signed DORA in a sort of status quo condition. So they signed DORA, they didn't do anything, but their signature was the impetus for action. So they looked at an as-is situation, what are we currently doing? How do we currently assess research and researchers? Then they did a CAPS analysis, after which they created what they call the future state, which is really just a strategic plan around responsible research assessment, which they then launched and are now implementing and evaluating. So I think really great work is happening there. Like all research assessment reform, it's not linear, so things have to be iterative. And what I think is really critical to their approach is that they've embedded evaluation in to make sure that we're not moving from one system that doesn't work to another system that is also quite poor. They really are going to get the evidence to show that, this system is doing what we think it is, what we'd like it to do. The tri-agencies have also signed DORA, so it's very exciting, and implementation is starting. I'd love to see more consultation and evaluation of the implementation that they're doing. But I wanted to highlight, for instance, CIHR has examples of contributions and impacts across the different pillars and how you can represent them in terms of sort of a DORA lens. So everything from contributions to capacity building, mentorship and training, to things like creation, curation, sharing, or reuse of data sets. So again, looking at broader impacts than just publishing and bringing those to the fore when we're submitting grant applications. Another thing that I think is really critical is that the tri-agencies in their implementation have not just sort of settled on telling people to submit new information that they think is like of broader relevance than just publishing. They're actually attempting to address peer review culture. So there is an absolutely significant, enormous peer review culture change needed to actually have people be presented with sort of DORA abiding information about a potential candidate, and actually take that information and meaningfully incorporate it into their assessment. And I really think that there's going to be a significant need for additional training and monitoring of how this goes. So, for example, in their training packages, they've sent out this information, but we need to make sure that during the actual discussions, that when someone veers towards talking about, say, impact factor, or talking about like productivity or lack of productivity in terms of number of papers, that we are reminding them, okay, but this is not the be all and end all of research impact. There is this broader context as per sort of DORA. I think that, I'm certainly happy to see that tri-agencies and institutions are beginning to sign DORA. But I think that right now, I've commented in a recent editorial that the reality is that in this current situation, many researchers, myself included, I feel like we're stuck between two systems. So for instance, the tri-agencies, they have a new section, for instance, called a progress report when submitting project grants, where you can reflect upon sort of DORA-like contributions. But they also still have the CCCV, which, beyond being a nuisance to complete, asks me to put forward all my publications, all these traditional metrics, which can then be counted and sort of being counted against one another and compared. So at this point, I think it's unclear to me how the new type of system of these sort of narrative summaries of broader impact is being considered in relation to the traditional system. And it feels like double the work. I'm doing the work of the old system and the work of the new system. What I'd like to see is movement towards just a new system. We need evidence of effectiveness, so it's a bit of a transitionary period. But right now, I think it's quite a demand for researchers. The other thing I'll say with respect to tri-agencies signing on to DORA, which I think is great, there's an unfortunate gap right now, though, between the alignment of the funder and their commitment to DORA and DORA principles and the institutions they place their money in. So there's a small number of institutions, when you look at the grander scale of number of institutions in Canada, that have signed DORA. So, Calgary signed. So we know that when money goes to Calgary, Calgary is trying to ensure responsible research, assessment, and reform amongst their scientists and staff. But most institutions have not signed DORA. They are not considering research assessment reform. So in a way, the funder's telling us these broader impacts matter, but our own institutions, they may still be evaluating us for, say, tenure and promotion based on the traditional metrics alone. So again, there's this tension between these two systems. I would love to see the tri-agencies, as they did with the data management policy, require institutes in receipt of tri-agency funding to create a strategy to think about responsible research assessment reform. I don't really care if people sign DORA. I think it's important. That can be an impetus for doing this. But what I think is important is that institutions think in a very considered way about how they're assessing research and researchers, and how that will impact sort of achievement of their mission-driven goals. As an example of what another institution has done, so this is a university hospital in Germany called Charité. What they do is they do a narrative CV only, and amongst the items on their narrative CV, they ask for things like contributions to the research field. This may include publications, so it's not that publications are gone. Obviously, they're a main currency for how we communicate to certain audiences. But then they also ask about contributions to open science explicitly, contributions to team science, so this can be sort of collaborations or trainee as well. And then interactions with stakeholders. So this might be knowledge translation activities, maybe patient engagement activities, and a broader sort of scope of interactions. And they have a staff member who sits on hiring meetings. Their whole job is to act as a neutral party to balance discussions, so that if someone brings up sort of quantity and impact factor, they will bring the room back to reality of the mission-driven goals of the institutions to value these types of practices. So I think this is really great because it's streamlined, it's focused around the goals of the institution, and it doesn't create additional burden for researchers. So I've commented a lot on sort of the Canadian open science space. I hope I've balanced my perspective in saying that, I think there's strong recognition, we're getting good policies out there, but to recognize that there's still a gap in that recognition and the desire for action in terms of actually effectively implementing. So it's a moving space, but I think we're active and part of the discussion in a way that we hadn't traditionally been. So I'm really positive to see that. And the good news is, from a much broader perspective, I feel that open science is really truly here to stay. We've got the UNESCO open science recommendations, EU open science policy, multiple national plans for open science, including our own, which deals with the federal agencies, WHO policy on open access, and many, many more. So I feel that we are at sort of a bit of a tipping point here, and that we're making the progress that will allow us to maintain our innovation and support things like equity and research integrity as we work to really getting open science done. I do think in terms of getting open science done, monitoring is absolutely essential. And monitoring is also essential in an efficient way if we're going to use open science as something we incentivize or reward. So if we're acknowledging open science behavior, we need to be able to monitor it and capture it quickly. So on the screen, I share with you an example of a dashboard prototype that our team has developed for the Montreal Neurological Institute, which, by the way, is one of Canada's, I'd say, leading institutions in terms of open science recognition and implementation. And so you can see we have a variety of open science practices, and this automatically reports for the institution on these practices. So it allows them to create interventions to target improvements, but it also allows them to acknowledge and reward when they see good practices happening. Just the last couple slides here. If you came here hoping to find resources related to responsible research assessment, DORA has a ton. So we actually have a tool, it's like a repository of resources called ReformStabe that I just wanted to bring to your attention. So that's a searchable repository of these documents. So there may be something relevant to what you're looking for there. And you're also very much welcome to reach out to me if you're interested in the intersection of open science and research assessment reform, or research assessment reform more specifically. I'd be happy to chat. I do think that change in this space won't be linear. There's significant discipline and institutional considerations that need to be done. But there are sort of small building blocks for impact, as you can read more about on the DORA website, that we can take and we can make change progressively. We shouldn't have to do everything. I think things can be iterative, and you can identify particular areas that are sort of low-hanging fruit to start with when you're reforming research assessment. So I'll stop there. I definitely think there's a little bit of time for discussion, and I think there's already some comments in the chat and Q&A.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Coby. That was an exceptionally good talk. And we're clearly at a tipping point in this particular junction with open science and older systems. I think we've got several thoughtful questions here that we'll try to get through before our time is up. Perhaps we'll go a couple of minutes over just to see if we can.
For sure.
So to start, one in the chat, how are the open access examples cited, including those on open access publishing, trial registration, taking into consideration equity concerns? The focus seems to be on publicly funded studies and trials, non-publicly funded studies.
Yeah, so I think equity is really like a core intersection with open science and research assessment. Like for so long in my career, I wanted to focus around implementing open science. And what I've realized is that that's not possible without reforming research assessment. And when I started to consider research assessment, then the lens of equity became very apparent to me. So I would say, like for each of those practices, equity is integral. So there's equity in terms of accessing the information. But for instance, like with trial registration, like equity in knowing sort of that the trial is even happening, that you can find that information in a single space. I think that's really critical. I think with regards to data sharing as well, equity and access to data. So we know, for instance, like in the Ebola crisis, information on Ebola doesn't sit in Africa. It sits in servers in other jurisdictions altogether. So like that seems crazy that the people locally impacted have historically faced barriers in getting access to their own data to analyze for their own goals and purposes, right? So certainly seems reminiscent of some of our issues with in the past and current, frankly, with Indigenous populations in Canada. So I think this equity lens is really integral. And for some of the work that we're doing, we're funded through the SEFREF BHI program. And we actually have sort of an equity cross-cutting theme to better identify sort of where the intersections of equity and open science are.
Excellent. So what are your comments regarding the enforcement of open access requirements in relation to qualitative data? So adhering to these open access requirements implies violation of ethical obligations, as researchers are required to make available all data, including transcripts and analyses. However, regardless of efforts to anonymize qualitative data, people with contextual insights can still identify study participants, and that might expose them to harm or danger depending on the subject matter and context.
Yeah, it's a great point. So it's there are no real I would say like widely accepted standards for how to de-identify qualitative data. What I would say is like so open data is one use case for data deposit. Many types of data will not be shared openly, but you could probably prepare your data for deposit with restricted access, and that certain vetted users in alignment with sort of your community's sort of wishes could access that data for secondary use. So it's the idea sort of as open as possible, as close as necessary. But with that said, I wanted to highlight that actually, depending on the population that you're working with, certain groups of people don't actually care if they're identified. So for instance, like the rare disease community, it's always been said from the research perspective, oh, like can't share that data. It's like, very identifiable. But when you ask the patients, they're like, no, please share my data. I don't mind if it's like overwhelmingly they say this, that they want the data out there because many rare diseases are genetic and they want discovery and innovation to occur. So you have to again think of it from the perspective of the patient who we are acting, or the participant who we are the custodian of their data. So I think understanding your community's preferences and values is an important component of deciding whether your data should be open or completely closed, or where between on that continuum it should be.
Mm-hmm. How can we begin to change the narrative surrounding the traditional metrics of academic success to ensure that, one, all people have access to research outputs regardless of socioeconomic status, career status, health status, etc., and two, academics who prioritize open science do not fall behind their peers who adhere to the most traditional metrics of academic success? And additionally, how do we take the Dora Declaration and use it to facilitate these changes authentically?
Yeah, these are all really great questions. I think with respect to, how do we ensure that everyone has access to um, the like equitable access to information? I think a huge component of this is really looking at advocacy. Like I think so much of what I do as a researcher in this space is advocacy, making people aware. I think the general public, whenever I talk to them about open science, like it resonates, right? Like this is not something people can't relate to. They assume that if data is collected, that it is used for its intended purpose, and that others with the relevant credentials to make and innovate and make new discoveries have access to the data to do that, right? So I think it's about engaging politically and actively as an advocate to make people aware of that. I think that there's a lot of focus around knowledge translation, knowledge mobilization. For me, I really see like patient citizen engagement as really central to open science and its implementation, because those communities, they get this and in fact assume it's occurring. So an example I'll give is I gave a talk as part of the ACT, the Trials Consortium meeting in Montreal. And so I gave my whole session was about DMP templates, four that I mentioned that our team has developed for specific medical designs. And so I gave my talk, I talked about these DMPs and where you can find them and how they think they're useful for these types of research studies. And then at the end, a patient partner raised her hand and she was like, I'm sorry. She's like, I'm really struggling to sort of understand. Are you telling me that this is like the first time we're formalizing data management? And that like what did you use before? Like if you're creating new plans, like what was the status quo? And I think that speaks volumes in terms of like, the trust that the public has and expects from us as researchers. So yeah, I think that's sort of very political. And then in terms of your question was about not falling behind as someone who's practicing open science. I think there's a window here actually where people who are doing open science can be sort of rare and special and recognized before it becomes a norm. So I sympathize with trainees who are working with PIs who don't value this, but I think if you're in a position of privilege, like for you, like myself, who's sort of in a more stable, tenured position, I mean, you drive your research program, and I think that this is a way that you can stand out in some ways to say that you are sharing your data. The other thing is by publishing open access, by sharing your data, by creating preprints, we know that it actually helps positively traditional metrics. So you get cited more, your work gets used more. So it's like you're doing what I think is morally valuable, but also you're feeding into the traditional system anyway. So I think that is a bit of a balance between the two. I also think in terms of how to not fall behind is having the conversations with your department chairs or leads about sort of what aspects of open science they value and picking them off one by one. You don't have to revolutionize and do everything. It may be unreasonable to do that and you would fall behind, but maybe there's certain things that you can do that, there is recognition of the value for. And then, so it was about how DORA declaration can be used to facilitate change authentically.
Yes.
Well, I think like you can sign DORA, you can engage with DORA. There's also a related initiative in the European Union called Kawara, which is very similar. Again, it's about advocacy. I think it's about community building. So one of the things we're looking to do in Canada, myself and Stephanie Warner at the University of Calgary leading their DORA implementation, is to actually create a community of practice around DORA in Canada so that there can be sharing of lessons learned and we don't have to duplicate one another's errors, and sharing of, say, evaluative frameworks and things like this as well.
Thank you. So take a few more minutes just to answer the remaining questions. I'm going to combine a couple here because I think they might be related. So the next question is, what countries would you say are doing open science well, and what strategies have contributed to their success? And then at the same time, we'll tie this to the question about some ways to measure non-traditional research outputs.
For sure. So generally speaking, I would say that the European Union as a whole is sort of leading in this space. Definitely the US have come down and have created some really strong policy and monitoring in recent years. But I think generally when people think about open science, they look to Europe as sort of our visionary leader. Where I did my PhD, for example, in the Netherlands, I really truly feel that one of the impetuses for open science implementation was the downfall of Diederik Stapel, who I I so it was like, I don't wish a good fraud case on Canada, but on the other hand, I feel like that fraud case really caused deep reflection of like the system of science and how someone could, through their whole career, be taking shortcuts and not getting REB and not, doing things that seem like very basic and get away with it for so long. So I think that was a major factor. I also think that they have a significant undertaking to involve citizen science and perspectives. And I think open science really resonates with the average member of society. And I think that also it's like from a more conservative perspective, like a return on investment, right? Like right now, money's going out, trials are being conducted. Those results never see the light of day, right? So it's I think there's a lot of impetus from a lot of different sort of individuals and political perspectives on making open science happen. And in terms of was resources, is that the question about DORA?
That's the next one that we're going to.
What was the last one? There was something. There was a third piece I missed.
Sorry. What kinds of non-traditional research outputs, or how can you measure non-traditional research outputs?
Yeah. So a common way to measure non-traditional research outputs is through what I call the narrative CV. So it's like a text-based CV of accomplishments. So in broad categories, you ask people about what their contributions have been, such as to team science or collaboration, and then they would provide an account of that. And other ways to sort of reduce the focus, for instance, some institutions like Howard Hughes Medical Institution in the States, when they definitely ask for publications, but when they ask for publications, they don't allow participants submitting for various awards or funding to include the journal name. So you just know the team of authors and the topic of the study and the year it was published. So there's ways of sort of valuing sort of the network and output in a way that's not explicit to sort of the journal impact.
Yeah, and speaking of those journals, so how are the 6 major publishing houses that receive the majority of funding from open access publishing perceiving DORA?
It's interesting. So I would say we have many publishers who support DORA financially. Certainly some of them have signed DORA and made that commitment. So you'll notice, like, for instance, like PLOS journals, they're, I think, an excellent example. You cannot find easily the impact factor of a PLOS journal. So they've sort of removed that. And they've also embedded a suite of different metrics, kind of in the form of badges or like banners at the top of articles, where you can find out, like, is there open data? Is the piece, well, all of their journals are open access, but is there pre-registration occurring, for instance, of the study ahead of time? So they're de-emphasizing the journal impact factor, and they're emphasizing other types of metrics, such as open science, that can be valued.
And does Dora have resources available for researchers to learn how to track and measure their non-traditional research outputs?
Yeah, we have, I wouldn't say we have like a toolkit specifically for that, but within the Reform State repository, you'll definitely find some tools that will help you do that. So especially if you're interested in that, I would look towards the narrative CV. Like searching around narrative CVs would probably be your best bet.
Excellent. Question here. How do you feel open science can help address the 6 A's of research assessment: analysis, advocacy, allocation, accountability, acclaim, and adaptation? And there's a link here from the commenter.
Oh, I didn't see the link. I don't see the chat. Oh, there I do. So the 6 A's, now I can see the A's. Well, I mean, all of those things, or several of those things, are like phases of the research life cycle. So I think we need to reflect upon how we can bring transparency to each phase of the research life cycle, and that will support, I would say, accountability. And I think advocacy I've touched on already. Allocation of resources I've touched on already. Acclaim and adaptation, I'm not sure. I'd have to think more about those two. But I think that having a public or protected public record of research that has occurred is an important way to sort of manage data and research and its outputs in order to use that for a variety of different purposes. Right now, I think we're suffering from like a very insular perspective. Like, whereas I see data as something that participants give us to be accountable for to them, I think the reality right now is that there's not a lot of ability to sort of adapt from the research that we have originally sought to do, because there's this protectionist thinking where people just keep the data to themselves, they hold it to their chest, and it's their data. And I think that sort of change in mindset needs to occur to foster that adaptation as well.
Okay, thank you. With that, we've got 3 minutes till it's 10 after. I really appreciate people staying online. Dr. Kobe, that was an exceptionally important and informative talk. Thank you. It really does feel like we're at a tipping point here. So your perspective has been immensely valuable for me, and I'm sure I speak for everybody when I say that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate everyone's time, especially on a Friday.
Yes, yeah, thank you. And just one last note here for everybody. So our next KT Connects talk will be coming up soon. And so it's going to break our longstanding tradition of holding these talks on Friday at 12 noon, and we're going to have it on a Wednesday. In this case, it'll be on November 6th at 1 p.m. We've done this so that we can have our exceptional speakers come and provide a new perspective on the open science theme, that of media and journalism researchers examining the influence of print publications on the public understanding of science. So please stay tuned to communications from Health Research BC in the coming days for more information about this webinar, including registration details. Of course, you can find all of our recorded webinars on Health Research BC's website. That's healthresearchbc.ca/KT-webinars. Here you'll also find 7 years worth of our KT Connects content focused on knowledge translation skills and best practices. And it includes the 4 webinars previous to this one, all focused on the theme of open science. So we encourage you to watch those and please share them with your networks. And thank you for your time and interest. And we hope you found this talk as enlightening as we have. So your feedback is incredibly important, and we do use it to inform future webinars. So a link to this, to a survey, will be sent to you right after this. So please take 2 minutes just to share your thoughts with us and the speaker. That's it. So we hope to see you next time. Until then, take care and have a great day.